Welcome to the Cities of Migration Learning Exchange. Today's webinar is the first in a three-part series we are co-hosting with Hire Immigrants to bring to life the recently released report, Investing in Refugee Talent, Lessons Learned in Labor Market Integration. This session explores the business case for investing in refugee talent. Employment is a central component to the integration and inclusion of new immigrants in our communities, and the same is true for refugees, only the stakes are often higher. A new language and new culture augmented often by the trauma of dislocation. Sadly, this can also make the business case for refugee employment harder to see. The good news is that the benefits of labor market integration are well reported and increasingly apparent to private sector actors. As more and more businesses step up to help connect refugees to jobs, we're learning those efforts can have a significant impact on their business bottom line. To help us unpack this important message, we are joined today by leading experts in the field. I'm delighted to welcome our guests. Joining us from Jumpstart Refugee Talent, we have Mustafa Alio, who is co-founder and development director at Jumpstart Refugee Talent here in Toronto. From the Business Development of Canada, BDC, we have Elizabeth Bolton Lim, who is BDC's National Diversity Officer. And from Hire Immigrants, our co-host and today's guest moderator, we have Devin Franklin, Project Manager, Magnet Export Business Portal, and the Hire Immigrants Program. As Project Manager of the Magnet Export Business Portal, Devin supports businesses to realize the benefits of tapping into foreign markets and to build the capacity of Canadian businesses and entrepreneurs. And when she's not doing that, Devin also leads Hire Immigrants, an online platform designed and built for employers to find and share good practices on immigrant employment, and a network hub for increased awareness of the valuable skills and talent immigrants bring into local and global businesses. Over the last 2 years, a major focus of that work has been to promote the business case for refugee talent here in Canada, in Germany, and internationally. So it's my very great pleasure now to welcome Devin. Devin, the podium is yours.
Thank you much, Kim, for having me, and thank you to our other panelists that are here. I'm going to give a brief context before turning it over to Mustafa and Elizabeth to share their insights with us. So as Kim so graciously said, I'm the project manager of Hire Immigrants, and in the last year specifically, 2 years really, have focused on really making the business case for investing in refugee talent. What does that look like? Who's involved? Who needs to be at the table? So just a little bit about Hire Immigrants. What makes us unique is that Hire Immigrants empowers employers to fully leverage immigrant talent in their work. And so really what that means is looking at settlement from the lens of employers. So our founder, Senator Ratna Ahmedbar, was really passionate about looking at the other side of the employment dichotomy. There are lots of services, both employment and settlement, for newcomers to a given country, and ours is Canada, but there weren't enough resources and services specifically for employers to help them to leverage talent pool and also know, where the gaps are in their own hiring practices to tap into the talent. And what that really means in our core activities is one, making the business case about newcomers generally, and as I said, over the last couple of years, it's really specifically looking at the nuances of the refugee population and what that means for our employment practices. It's identifying outdated hiring practices. So again, if you have the same old practices, you're going to get the same old talent. And so we're really trying to support employers to see the value in really reflecting on their hiring practices and seeing the talent that they're missing out on by some of the unconscious biases that are inherent to some of the more traditional, more of the traditional hiring practices. I'm just going to turn my volume up. And the last is connecting to leverage immigrant talent for your recruitment. I'm just getting a bit of feedback that my sound's a bit off, so I'm just going to switch to my handheld, and hopefully that will make it sound a bit better. So hopefully my sound's a little bit better with this sound. So when it comes to the refugee focus and focusing on refugee talent, it was really about bringing new stakeholders to the table and really convening for action. And what that meant was leveraging the power of our founder, Radna Ahmedvar, and really convening what came to be called the Refugee Jobs Agenda Roundtable. And it was really intended and organically formed with a lot of employers responding and wanting to do something, but really not knowing where to start. And so the roundtable, like I said, was very organic in its convening. It was private sector and public sector employers saying, you know, we have vacancies, we have opportunities for these new Canadians, but we're not sure how to tap into them, we're not sure how to connect with them, or how to support them in their employment. And that's really where a number of the other organizations that were involved became crucial to that success. So our community organizations, our service providers, and I'm thrilled that both Mustafa and Elizabeth, who are roundtable members, are here on the panel today and can speak to you know, what the roundtable solicited and what were some of the successes. And I think BDC really is a genuine success out of the roundtable. But it was bringing all of these stakeholders together at the roundtable. And here's just, you know, a really, I couldn't put all the logos on there, but over 40 members in our local roundtable, so the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, that came together really motivated with an interest to be action-oriented, to follow through on a commitment to see refugees find meaningful employment and really foster that integration at the local level. And so just at a very high level, some of our key successes were job fairs. We had a fabulous employer guide, again, to support employers to really understand what is this new population. There were a lot of questions coming from employers just not understanding, you know, can a refugee legally work in Canada? What are their language competencies? What's their education and skills profile? And I know Mustafa is going to speak to really changing the narrative of you know, the assumption that refugees are uneducated, or the assumption that refugees don't bring their own set of skills and competencies to a host country. And so that was really eye-opening for the roundtable. We had a fabulous constructions trade program. The Starbucks hiring initiative came out of the roundtable, and the fabulous BDC internship program, which I know Elizabeth will speak to, were just some of the roundtable outcomes. And so, you know, intrinsic to this success and wanting to ensure that this truly success story got out into the public, with the support of Cities of Migration and the Bertelsmann Stiftung, we recently released this report called Investing in Refugee Talent. And really the focus is on sharing those successes, sharing those models, and really having, you know, an employer voice at the forefront of speaking to, you know, is this a humanitarian cause? Is this of economic benefit? And I think what you'll learn through this webinar is it can be both. And I'm going to, you know, have Mustafa speak more to that in the next little bit to really talk about what that looks like. I want to say that this is the first of a 3-part webinar series that we're really excited to be co-hosting with the Cities of Migration under their Immigrant Futures project. And it really will be looking at delving into the report, bringing it to life, animating some of these fabulous success stories. And we're very, very excited to be turning it over to Mustafa Alio, who wrote a fantastic essay and has been so intrinsic to so many of the success stories that are featured in the report. So Mustafa Alio, as Kim said, is the co-founder and development director at Jumpstart Refugee Talent. A refugee himself, Mustafa founded the Refugee Career Jumpstart Project, which has been rebranded to Jumpstart Refugee Talent. And it was founded in 2015 with really the goal to assist newly arrived Syrian newcomers with their entry into both education and the job market. It since has grown tremendously to encompass all refugee groups within its scope, and today, under its new name, Jumpstart Refugee Talent, is highly regarded as a Canadian non-for-profit based in Toronto that's focused on streamlining the process between the arrival of refugees and their employment. So we're really excited to have Mustafa here with us today, and I'm going to turn it over to him to have him really make, you know, what is the business case for hiring refugees. So Mustafa, the podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Devin, and thank you everyone attending the webinar today in the morning here in Toronto and from Europe as well. Just want to start with my presentation on the first slide, where when I started this and when we start just working with refugees and meeting many other people, I often used to hear a lot of the sense of refugees only from tragedy perspective, from a humanitarian lens. I rarely would see someone actually talk about what refugees can bring to the table, what kind of skills, what the contribution they have. And that at one point kind of just got me a little bit into, is that true, is that not true? And I start doing my own research at that point. Then definitely from there jumpstart and started kind of my own advocacy in terms of trying to shift the lens from not only kind of a humanitarian lens, because this is a very important one, so definitely not to take it off the table, but also to kind of create that balance to go on the economic lens on refugee talent. So I'll just go and listen to so many people, though, so you would often hear, for example, many people would be aware of the 65.6 million people, refugees have been forced out of home, that nearly 20 people are forcibly displaced every minute as a result of the conflict. But then when we ask even those who advocate for refugees and work with them for years on if they have any kind of proof or research in terms of what refugees can bring to the market. And then you would rarely hear, for example, there was a research that came out of the U.S. that refugees contributed $60 billion to the U.S. economy in the last 10 years. And more than what they took in services. And that kind of research was declined to be even published at the White House at that point, but it was widely spread around the U.S. and many organizations and people who advocate for this. Many people, I mean, how many of us would know that many refugees are well educated? For example, estimated that nearly half of the Syrian refugees who enter Europe have a university degree. In the UK also there was an interesting research where I found that about 300, like training a doctor from scratch would cost about $340,000, where certifying a refugee doctor estimated to be at $34,000, which is only 10% of that cost. All of those numbers, and definitely, I mean, that would be attached to the tax contribution that those refugee doctor can bring to the economy. One of the other things that Jumpstart tried to focus on, also working with refugees, is that to focus on the meaningful employment, because as a part of unemployment, maybe, yes, it is a problem and we're trying to address with this, but at the same time, we're trying to address the underemployment. One of the interesting facts that we know here, for example, in Canada, that the cost of the underemployment in Canada is around about $16 billion a year, in a way. And then the other, like this slide, I'm just trying also to show that there was actually a trial happening in the camp where refugees, a group of refugees were giving, instead of the food and the allowance, they had a humanitarian kind of, let's say, basket that they get. They would give the value of that in dollars. And that actually created, when refugees start getting those humanitarian baskets in money-wise, they actually contributed to the economy. You would see from this, for example, research that real income in the local areas, the research found that each additional adult refugees in either of those two camps increased the annual real income in the local area by $204 to $253. This is from the $120 we're giving. So basically they double the amount. This was equivalent to 60% and 90% increase in a way. So that also was a big proof in a way that when refugees are given the opportunity to contribute, they will take it on in a way. And then the other example, that's just a fun fact in a way that if you, when I put kind of research, people who came to countries as a refugees and then the contribution, the economy they created. And then you would see from this one, for example, the Frank Lowe with the Westfield Corporation, the Intel from WhatsApp, John Cannon, all of those, you would see that 7 refugee entrepreneurs contributed to about $585 billion, companies that basically raise the economy. So every time when I hear people talking about, like in a way, refugees from a humanitarian perspective, then I mean, if someone coming to us and say, or come to me and say, okay, they are economic burden, and often I hear people on the other side just trying to defeat this argument by actually raising and talking only about the humanitarian aspect of it. So I'm saying, why not start talking their language, like someone who talk about like refugee from that perspective. The other example I want to bring was the previous one was actually those are examples of refugees who came recently to Canada and contributed, and one of them actually was also in England. The other one also, what we did at Jumpstart actually through our work, we created something called social return on investment. And then as if 2017, we're still working right now on the numbers of 2018 to publish it soon. But in 2017, so basically every dollar invested in Jumpstart, we gave Canada, and that basically supporting refugees finding meaningful employment, we gave Canada $7.5 in tax saving and contributions. This is one thing when I actually had a sitting with the Germany representative in Geneva talking about this number, and that was I mean, even people who supposed to be representing a countries at the UNHCR kind of sometimes miss on the facts and the contributions refugees can bring economically. And that graph itself in there got us about 30 minutes more just to talk about it and then to create that interest. But the thing is right now, if I'm able to create like if I was able to create that kind of case, that's what I try to do, that actually refugees do contribute. And then looking at refugees from economic perspective is something that everyone start kind of have more in their minds, just like come back with it. I just want to say, so from the why, then now to how can we actually benefit from that perspective? So one of the ideas is just be open to new ideas. One of the something that I keep hearing from a lot of people saying that there is no need to recreate the wheel. And then my first thought at that point, if the wheel is broken, then it's okay to recreate the wheel. I'm saying yes, not to duplicate the effort and all of that, but we clearly need new programs. When it comes in program being implemented for refugees, and then they say, especially when we say newcomers or migrant maybe in Europe, if we combine economical migrants and refugees in the same way. So we're giving one program to two different groups, at least in the beginning. I'm not saying at the end, but that's okay to recreate the wheel and then try to focus and innovate program that would focus on harnessing the power and the economic contributions of refugees. And also definitely the other thing is just to bring the private sector in, because bringing the private sector, every time we say that as a nonprofit, we need to manage it as a business in order for us to make it successful. And then the other thing is just definitely bridging the gap. I'm part of the international group that we always advocate. If you're going to work with refugees or you want to serve refugees, you're going to work with refugees. So nothing about us without us, not because it's, it's the right thing to do. It's, again, it's a smart thing to do to gain the trust. One of the main issues of working with refugees is trying to get their trust. And definitely that happened when we work with them. The other thing, innovation comes from right data and collection. This is something that we need to focus on. I can answer it a little bit more. I'm just running out of time. That not only getting the data, but we need to get the right data when it comes to refugees, understanding their journey. And the bottom-top approach is that always we consult with them from this data, then we can create the programs. Take it step by step. Usually always working with refugees might sound a little bit overwhelming often one starts. And also we see a lot of programs being funded that they just want to get it out of the pool and just start working on a program. But that actually, I've seen a lot of projects based on this kind of mentality falling short. The conclusion basically that refugees are contributors. This is something that we always, there are many, unfortunately, there aren't many research when it comes to proving a refugee economic contribution. This is something that I hope that everyone here today on the panel maybe to encourage that research society to do more of that, because the case there and it exists. The other thing that policymakers should change the narrative of refugees from burden to economic contributors. That's it. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mustafa. I was rushing in, folks, but that's just so that there is more time for you to ask him all of your questions and pick his brain. Mustafa brings so much expertise and insight, especially on this economic case. So I look forward to your questions in a little bit. But before then, I'd really like to hear from one of our business leaders. So it's my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Bolton-Lim from the Business Development Bank of Canada. Elizabeth is BDC's National Diversity Officer, and with close to 15 years of diversified experience in commercial lending, Elizabeth is well acquainted with the trials and tribulations of Canadian entrepreneurs, which are the same and similar trials that our newcomer and entrepreneurs face as well. Throughout her career, she has successfully married her business know-how with her passion for creating a diverse and inclusive workplace and community. And being a first generation herself of mixed race heritage, Elizabeth has firsthand experience in the challenge of non-inclusive workplaces. She has leveraged her experience and perspective into strong advocacy in her workplace and the workplaces of others. Elizabeth supports diversity and inclusion in the communities within BDC, and she's a mentor, and she mentors newcomer entrepreneurs through the Access Employment's Entrepreneur Connections program. And so we're really excited to welcome Elizabeth and have her speak about the BDC internship program that's featured in the Hire Immigrants Report and on our website. So Elizabeth, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Devin, and thank you everyone for having me here today. So I just wanted to begin by telling you a little bit about BDC. So BDC, or Business Development Bank of Canada, is the only Canadian bank devoted exclusively to entrepreneurs. So we support entrepreneurs in all industries and all across Canada with financing, capital, and advisory services. BDC has one shareholder, and that's the Government of Canada. So we're also very proud to be the first bank in Canada to receive the Beneficial Corporation certification. So we're a B Corp. B Corp businesses act in ways that benefit society as a whole rather than focusing solely on making profits. So we have about 2,200 employees and close to 123 business centers across Canada. And I believe one of the things that makes us a great organization is our employees. So we share a very common sense of purpose. The work that we do is very meaningful. So when it came to the war in Syria, no one was untouched. The sheer magnitude of the refugee crisis, it made us wonder, what can we do to help? So in 2015, we gladly became a member of the Syrian Refugee Jobs Agenda Roundtable that Devin was speaking about. Since Canada was welcoming Syrian refugees, we wanted to really help our community partners help these newcomers. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. We were already working with our community partners to connect us with newcomer talent, and one of those is Access Employment. They connect us, like I said, with newcomer talent, and we also sponsor a program, Access's program called Entrepreneurship Connections. It provides newcomers with training and a host of supports to start a business in Canada. So Access and their partners had identified a number of Syrian newcomers that wanted to start a business and they thought would benefit from entrepreneurial training. But most of these that they had identified had a lower Canadian language benchmark, a CLB. So since language was going to be a challenge, Access, because the program's delivered in English, Access modified the program and it was adapted in Arabic to address this challenge. And guess what? BDC has Arabic-speaking employees, so of course we jumped on board, and our employees all the way from Montreal came to be facilitators and mentors in the program. So Jumpstart is also another organization that we work with. So Mustafa called us one day and asked us to support a program that they were starting called Welcome Talent Canada. We thought, what a great idea to leverage LinkedIn and all of its resources to help Syrian newcomers find employment and mentorship. So, of course, BDC employees volunteered again to be mentors and were matched with Syrian newcomers. So it didn't stop there. We really wanted to do more. And at this point, through our community partners, we came to understand that Syrian newcomers have unique needs that need to be addressed as they settle into their new lives in Canada. So health and well-being are key needs. Like other newcomers, they need to find employment commensurate with their skills and experience. So we took our internship program and we adapted it for senior newcomers. And here we got help from our community partners. So here they identified and invited job-ready Syrian newcomers to a job skills workshop that we hosted. And in this one workshop, we actually found 4 amazing refugee interns, 2 of whom are now permanent employees. So for these interns, we realized that we needed to provide some support. So English language support was provided, and also employee assistance. So normally this is a program that's provided to full-time employees, but we let the newcomers, the refugee interns, have that as well, because we saw value that this assistance would provide to the interns to help them cope with the disruption in their lives as the result of war, displacement, and resettlement. And the cost of this offering, it was small, but the impact that it had was immeasurable. So I would say BDC has benefited in a lot of ways. First of all, bringing in newcomer talent, it brings fresh perspectives. It also stimulates new thinking, and it introduces more effective ways of doing business. Also, newcomer employees, they speak languages other than English and French, and they have knowledge of different cultures, which only helps us to better understand and respond to our increasingly diverse customer base. Our community partners have introduced us to their partners and even other employers, and all of this to connect us with newcomer talent. Also, our surveys show us that our employees, they truly value diversity, and they believe that BDC's leadership supports diversity and inclusion in our workplace and in our communities. So our employees, they volunteer as mentors and business coaches, and through these experiences, they also gain valuable leadership, and they gain coaching skills as well. And also, when they give back, it promotes strong overall employee engagement. So it's a win-win for all. So I would say the future of the program, where do we go from here? We have run additional job skills workshops in Ottawa and Montreal and Vancouver. We've opened these up to all refugees, not just Syrian refugees now. And some of these workshops were even bilingual. We invited other employers, including other banks, to facilitate and be mentors in these workshops. So overall, I would say we consider the program a huge success, and we will continue to work with our community partners to connect us with refugee talent. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for sharing your insights and more about the program. And I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions from our audience about more of the nitty-gritty details about the program and how to get it started in their own businesses. So as our audience starts submitting questions for the audience Q&A, I actually have a few questions for the panel myself, just as we get things started. So maybe I'll start with you, Mustafa. And I know you had to rush through your presentation, so I'd really like you to expand on a really key idea that came out of your essay that's featured in the Investing in Refugee Talent report. You note that the most common approach to refugee settlement has been a top-down approach. So integration, policy, training programs, and the like have really been from a top-down. But you suggest that a bottom-up approach is really what's more effective, or what would be most effective in the refugee space. And so can you please just elaborate on this? What does that look like? What is a bottom-up approach for a community?
Yes, sure. From my notice, even in Europe or even in Canada and the US, I always see kind of the old player of the settlement work and working with newcomers. They always tend to find programs that they've been doing for years, and I'm not saying those programs are not working, but definitely they're working. Clearly, that's why they expand on them. But they go on just trying to tweak those programs a little bit in a way that will fit refugees based on what they think refugees they need. Sometimes those kind of ideas work, but mean, most of the times, at least to my kind of experience, don't work. The way we try to do it is, again, that start from the bottom where we go, we meet with refugees, and we collect data. And when we say collect data, it's not simply just having someone to come and just sit with them for like 5 minutes. Actually, we sit with every single, so in our database so far, we have over 900 refugees. And we sit with every single one for about like 30 minutes in a way, just trying to get the real and the right information, and at the same time trying to have a little bit of conversation with them of how would they see a program that would benefit them. And then we sit and then in a group we analyze this data, and then we try to come up with some ideas, and then those ideas we try to share with refugees on the ground who we think they might benefit from this, and just trying, would you get this? Like, would you have it? And then one of the, one of the programs that you mentioned, and it was a great success out of the roundtable, was the trade project. And this is exactly how we were able, so we were a small organization on the ground. The only benefit at that point we have is that connections with refugees, getting this data, and then we collected. I remember someone in one of the hotels at that point came as a refugee. The idea of the construction project, nobody even knew about it, not anyone in the round table. But that was something, 2 weeks after collecting data in the hotels where refugees exist, or shelters. And I had a chat with him and was like, we need to create something about this. And guess what? He's one of the first hires year and a half after, just to create the program. And I think that's why going to people, try to test even the idea, the thought with them before starting the program, and analyzing the data you get from them, understand their journey and then what they're looking for, and then create that program, then partner with others, just make it happen.
Fantastic, and I think that is such a, it seems like such a simple idea, but it's often so missed when we're, submitting proposals. If you're in the settlement sector, you're trying to create a plan for the next year, and sometimes we get so busy in our day-to-day that we, forget, especially with the refugee population, the programs that work for other immigration populations are not going to work necessarily or as easily with the refugee population, and it's about really engaging with the population, understanding where their skills are, and developing programs for that. So I think that's a powerful point. So Elizabeth, the business case that Mustafa's spoken to and that even you yourself spoke to, and talking about the programs that BDC has been involved in, it's really adding up. The talent, the skills, the benefits, the case seems to be strong. But on the other side of the employee equation, what has been the impact on some of your longtime BDC staff? So the people who, have been with the organization, for potentially decades, and now this new population of staff are coming into the workplace. What were some of the challenges, if there were any? Were there any issues? And how did you really work with BDC managers and staff alike to prepare them for this new population?
Yeah, that's a great question, Devin. Thanks. So I just wanted to start off by saying the impact on our employees, it was amazing. So it gave our employees a great sense of contribution and personal satisfaction, and it really, truly engaged them. So now they look at BDC as an employer who's aligned with their personal commitment. So, we've had no difficulty in getting, employees to volunteer. Had absolutely no difficulty in getting approval for these internships. The other big positive is that it enabled our employees to leverage their personal skills. For example, a lot of employees are multilingual, and it allowed them to give back in that way. It also allowed employees to, talk about their own stories of their own families emigrating to Canada. And also they've, opened up their own business networks and connections for the newcomer employees. So, just all around, it's been a great, it's been a great thing all around.
Amazing. That's really great to hear. I think that's one of the, some of the missed points when we think about refugee programs is really making sure that we have an inclusive workforce, so we're not just getting refugees in the door, but that they are staying, that they want to stay and they want to continue to grow with the organization. And that really comes down to your current staff. Are your current staff inclusive? Are they on board? And I think that comes from a management perspective. I think BDC, and just from working on a number of projects with the Roundtable, have done such a great job of empowering their current employees to really feel like this is a program for them as well. And to your point, it just leads to better engagement and employees not feeling any of that, not feeling threatened, not feeling that their position is threatened, but instead really seeing the opportunity engaging this population. So a question for the both of you before we go to some of the audience questions is really, from that employer perspective, what are some tips that you can share with employers or with community agencies or settlement agencies that may be in our audience today that are working with employers to really make it easier to recruit and hire refugees? What would you encourage employers to do? What kind of tips or insights would you pass over to them? So Mustafa, maybe we'll start with you, and then Elizabeth, you can chime in.
I think one of the main, if I'm going to come up with one tip, actually I would choose that try to focus on the actual skills, not the interview skills. One of the things that we hear a lot from employers when we go and match them with great talent and people who have really great experiences is that they focus more on the interview skills based on the cultural in this country. And those kind of interview skills usually varies from one country to another. And often employers kind of miss on the fact that culturally, refugees came from environment and culture that employers in interviewing for jobs or even getting jobs is a complete different norm. And you see them a lot focusing on, kind of forgetting that there is something different in the mind of refugees. And maybe just to follow up with this kind of tip is also just try to understand the culture, just try to familiarize yourself with the culture of refugees coming from. I often see a lot of employers kind of ask one question and miss on employing opportunities just because they did not ask the proper way of that question. And maybe I can give an example of this. We had to work with WeWork because now they have a commitment to hire 1,500 refugees globally in the next 5 years. And then we send a warehouse manager. And then someone who had this experience, and then we're saying that we want someone who had kind of, a collective experience working with a warehouse. So we sent someone who did exactly that. And actually they did not go forward with the person at that point. And one of the reasons then is that they asked, what did you do actually at the warehouse? And then the guy just simply say what is the exact description was then. But us knowing the culture in that country at that point, because the interviewer did not actually probe and try to go a little bit further in the questions, they missed on so many skills the refugee had. And should the employer or the recruiter ask those little bit more extra questions, be aware of the culture that actually in this country, warehouse means doing this and this and this and doing a lot more than just the job itself, the guy would have been hired in a way.
Yeah, amazing. And I completely agree that, and it comes back to one of Hire Immigrant's core outcomes is really looking at those outdated hiring practices and saying that, again, the same old practices when you're working with a diverse population just won't get you the talent that you need. And I agree on, not interviewing for simply interview's sake, but really looking at the skills. We had a tech firm interview a refugee, and when we followed up and said kind of why weren't they successful, they said it really came down to communication skills. But when we really started talking through the role required no communication. It was really working behind a computer and really working on code. And so again, re-looking at what are you hiring for, and making sure that we're not hiring because of a competency or skill that really isn't required to be successful in the role. Elizabeth, did you have a tip that you would give to employers, given that BDC has been so successful in your internship program and now your work with entrepreneurs? Any tip that you would give an employer that's really looking at this population and wants to engage?
Yeah, I have a couple of tips actually. So the first tip I would say would be to really build meaningful relationships with local immigrant serving organizations. So in our case it was Access and Jumpstart, because these are the organizations that are on the ground and they're going to give you the right information and they're going to help connect you with that newcomer talent. I also want to say about our internship program, if you do decide to do one yourself, you need to position it well for both hiring managers and interns. People have to understand that it is an internship. You don't want to build out some false hope that at the end there will be a full-time job waiting for that person. But if something turns out, that's great, and that happened for us. An equally great scenario, though, is that the intern gets to make a positive contribution, experience the North American work environment, also get a feel for the culture, and get that valuable work experience. So the employer benefits also, and I said it before, but it's a win-win situation. So I would say those are definitely a couple of tips. I do have one more if we have time. I think you need to get the executive support on board as well. So grassroots initiatives, they're great, but you really need to have that top support. And in our case, we were very lucky to have the full support of our president and CEO, Michael Denham. So yeah, those are my tips.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I completely agree. When you have that top-level executive support, it really trickles down to everyone in the organization. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Kim Turner from Cities of Migration to lead our audience Q&A. Thank you very much, Mustafa and Elizabeth, for sharing your expertise and insights. I'm sure there are some audience questions to continue the webinar. So Kim, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Devin, and thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mustafa. This has been a great session, and I want to get to as many of these questions that we have from our audience as possible. So let's see how many we can get through. Let's get started with a question that's come in, I think, via Twitter. And the question is about language, which is something I think both of you talked about. Language is a challenge. Should refugees focus on language first and then work? Are there any examples of doing both? And maybe we'll start first with Mustafa, and then we'll move to you, Elizabeth. Mustafa?
Sure. Language definitely one of the great barriers, but one of the things people also often miss when working with refugees, so the journey of refugees, they go from original country to hosting countries like Turkey, Kenya, and those kind of examples, and then they come to third countries and resettlement countries like Canada. I think one of the only country in the world that has actually both kind of designation, that hosting countries and third country, is Germany. But when people usually go often to those hosting countries, when they work, actually they learn language on jobs in a way. And then when people come to third countries or resettlement here in Canada or in Europe, this is often one of the main difference and kind of, let's say, not differences in the mind of refugees is, okay, so why should I just go to class and learn only the language? I've done that before. I've been in that hosting countries for so many years, and I've learned the language based while doing the job. And I think at that point, our role, because we do a lot of advocacy, we're just trying to explain that, I mean, here is a little bit different that, yes, we do focus on the job. We try to create a career map for every refugee that we have. And then we always emphasize on the fact that focusing on English or language training, this is something you need to do. At the same time, we listen to refugees. We try to come up with ideas and thoughts that hopefully will integrate kind of on-job training and language at the same time. Recently, actually, now we're doing work. I mean, we haven't officially, but published this kind of work we're doing, but soon it will be out. So there's a company right now. We're creating someone that creating company, and then he would hire refugees and give them shareholders of that company. So basically, he would give them a fair wage, and also he would give them share of the company just to give that sense of belonging. And then the way we try to hire refugees, that we would hire them in kind of a group. So let's say that there's in department there will be 5 refugees. We're trying to say, okay, 4 of them, it's okay if they don't speak the required level of the language for the job, and then 1 of them should do it. And that person will do kind of the way of translating in kind of the language training on a job. At the same time, the employer agreed that to bring someone to teach refugee English related to job, or even in general 1 hour a week, and this hour would be part of the part of the work, so that would be paid. However, this is not kind of, by the way, this is not a new approach. It was tried in Europe and few countries, and we're just now trying to bring it here to Canada. I think just the issue also now to advocate with employers and try to convince them that they should consider that. This also not as easy job as possible, but now we start seeing few more employers to be open to the idea.
Great, we're experimenting, and certainly BDC told us a little bit about that. Would you like to comment on the issue of language in the workplace?
Yeah, so Mustafa, you raised a lot of really great points. So yeah, language can be a barrier, and I absolutely agree. I believe that I think that they should be done at the same time. I don't think that it should prohibit someone from joining an organization. You know, that being said, though, there should be some, you know, a minimum level at least that someone could build upon, and that definitely could be done, you know, in the workplace. And you know, example of that, one of the persons that is a permanent hire now is doing English language training at the same time that she's doing her job. So, and it is working, it is successful, and I do believe that you know, as employers, we should provide that additional support. It doesn't cost a lot. The benefits are huge. They're very good. It's a good program.
That's great. So let's go to another question for you, Elizabeth. We have someone asking, what departments were the interns placed in? Was any additional training education required to learn about the Canadian financial institution?
Okay, that's a great question. So the interns were placed in, I got to put it on my fingers now, so we had human resources, we had legal, we had IT, and then we also had finance as well. Was any additional training or education required? You know, funny you should ask that, because you know, skills are skills. And, you know, for example, the intern that was placed in our legal department had legal training in Syria. So, I mean, she was perfect. She had that foundation. Same with the person that was put in the finance. He was a banker before in Syria. So, I mean, those skills existed before, and they were easily transferable into the positions that they were placed in.
That's great. Okay, I've got a couple of questions that about some of the data that was described and the challenge of measuring economic contribution and benefit. These are huge issues, more so maybe in the business place and elsewhere, but I think we're all learning that what's important gets measured, it gets counted. So Joan Anderson asks you, Mustafa, about, she wants to know, the Jumpstart presenter, she mentions the cost of underemployment of refugees in Canada. Would he please repeat the figure and the source for it? And maybe we can talk more generally about the cost of underemployment. Mustafa?
Sure. So it wasn't the cost of underemployment in Canada. So it wasn't my figure wasn't only for refugees. It was in general in Canada that the cost of underemployment. It was a report issued by CIBC bank here in Canada. I think in 2014 that the cost of it would be about $16 billion a year. In a way, and that taking contribution, so those who are underemployed, and then if they are actually employed in the same profession, they have to experience, and then what kind of the tax benefit they can bring the contribution and more income. So it was about $16 billion.
Do you want to comment, Elizabeth, on the cost of underemployment
Cost of underemployment
from an HR perspective in organizations?
Well, I think especially right now, and BDC came out with a study on labor shortage, and I think it's a missed opportunity if we're not looking at this important talent segment.
Okay, great. There's another question, Mustafa, from Manina, who wants you to clarify the return on investment number. For every dollar invested, how much did that translate into this SROI model that you've developed, the social return on investment?
Sure. So with the social return on investment, what we tried to do, so for example, we took the number of people we placed in 2017 into full-time, and we kind of calculated their average income. So the average income was about $50,000 for the people, like a year, so here. And we even dropped this just to be a little bit more conservative. We dropped it to $45,000. Then from this, we took the tax contribution, usually the average tax contribution per person on this, and for each person it was about $6,300 a year. And then that basically, when we get someone into many of those refugees, were actually either part of the sponsorship year, which is the government sponsorship, so living on government assistance, or even after that, just going to welfare. And then when we place them in a job, then that would save the government at least $9,312. So combining those two numbers, then we can come up that every dollar invested, and we took basically how much in funding we took to achieve the results of that number of people getting into a full-time jobs, and what was the total impact of it. Then we came up with this, which is every dollar invested in Jumpstart helping refugees finding meaningful employment, we give $7.5 back in tax savings and contributions. So those kind of the two numbers combined together. And also that's one of the actually unfortunately, I rarely see a non-profit sectors or settlement companies or agencies actually try to come up with business kind of ideas. I think just because I came from a business world, so and the three co-founders for Jumpstart also came from business world, so we always try to focus on those numbers that any company, when they want to measure their success and measure the contribution of the service they provide, and with that's the base where they present to investors in general. And then that's what we came up with. However, this time, and the social return on investment is not something that new that Jumpstart created, has been exist for the longest time. Usually it was used by CCR, the corporate social responsibility. We just brought this to the equation, and we show it as a part of the work we're doing.
That's very interesting, and I just want to quickly point out that we will be posting these presentations. You'll be able to capture the data from Mustafa and Elizabeth's presentations later. New question, this one from Etisham, who asks, according to your study, I think he means you, Mustafa, what is the startup trend in refugee immigrants? What type of businesses are they starting? I think this will be interesting for you too, Elizabeth, but we'll start with Mustafa.
I love this question. The reason is because it's a new finding for us. So our most recent program, we call it Angels plus Refugee Entrepreneurs. And basically this is connecting refugees with angel investors. We partnered with an umbrella that has over 1,400 angel investors called Angel Investors Ontario. And that actually also part of the program that we've been for a year trying to serve refugee entrepreneurs basically not formally, just trying to test ideas and see what they're looking for. And then one of the main things we kept hearing from refugees that I don't only need a entrepreneur training program, because most of the times that we don't know what to do after this. And at the same time, we did not want to recreate a training or basically create a training program that exists. For example, Elizabeth talked about Access, the connection. There's also Skills for Change. There's like few organizations that already have kind of entrepreneurial training. So we were trying to think of something that would be complementary. So even if people graduated from those, they can benefit from this program as refugees. Or if people, were not convinced that they want to go to a training program, now they have the chance to come to a program that would open a chances for them. So under this program, in the first month, we got 76 applications. We were blown away by the diversity of businesses refugees want to start, because basically what it is, I'm not sure if some of you are aware of Dragon Den or Shark Tank. So we're actually making kind of a Dragon Den or Shark Tank for refugees with 2 half-a-day preparation sessions before that to be given by angel investors. And we thought at that point that most of the businesses we're going to get, it would be like food business or kind of handmade, because that's what we see usually in there. But then literally we were blown away. We've seen someone who created a waste management solution based on AI, been in the country for only a year and a half. We've seen someone who is actually talking about language, who only finished high school, so not even graduated, but built connections in Turkey because he was waiting in Turkey, and now he's exporting cartons from basically Canada over there in $50,000 and $60,000 now. He has a company. We've seen someone who created food robotic things. It's an Internet of Things using this, and definitely there is like a food and restaurant and all of that. So it was the point where we thought that we know what refugees can bring and what kind of businesses they want to start. Even us as a refugee-led organization or even grassroots, we were surprised that when we create the right program, then we've seen the right results. So literally it was so many variation of refugees. We've seen someone who want to open a horse training kind of schools and has like a twist to it. Definitely we've seen some restaurants in a way. But surprisingly, 35% of those people were in kind of food business, 20% were in technology. We've seen some apps as well, like just kind of connecting refugees. And we're so excited because the first session is happening on March 1st. And I think something crazy good will come out of this program. Just the ideas that we have, like we've seen, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's very exciting. But I'm going to ask Elizabeth to also comment with what the types of businesses she might be seeing at the bank.
Yeah, this is absolutely a fun question as well. I agree. I love to see the businesses that the newcomers, refugee immigrants, are starting. And I have to say that the businesses they are starting are what they had back home. So they are experienced entrepreneurs, the ones that I've seen, and those are the businesses that they are starting. You know, for example, you can see in Sobeys now, Peace by Chocolate. That's a great example of a business that's been started here in Canada. But there are so many, and they're just amazing stories. And Mustafa, you mentioned some of them as well. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. So we've got time for maybe two more questions. I have a question from Joe who says, from an employability skills set perspective, how differently should an employer approach a refugee and a skilled immigrant applying through express entry, or applying at all? And maybe we can start with you, Elizabeth. And let's focus maybe on the skill set of the refugee and the immigrant, respectively. Not everyone in our audience will be familiar with the express entry.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to really focus on that skill set perspective. I don't think it should be approached in a different way necessarily, because that's really what you need to be looking for. In the end, you're a business, and you need to fill that role to get the job done, and you really need to just look for those skills. Yeah, I don't really know how to answer that any other way.
Yeah, no, I think that's very good. How about you, Mustafa? Do you want to comment?
So was it the question just to bring refugees from overseas under the express entry, or what exactly?
Well, the question was, it's on screen, from an employability skill set perspective, how differently should an employer approach a refugee and a skilled immigrant applying through express entry or applying for a position?
Okay, so basically applying, because the question was saying applying through express entry. So express entry is a system where people can come to Canada based on their skills in a way. So refugees cannot actually apply for express entry in a way. They are overseas. However, there is a program right now. We also partner with Talent Beyond Boundaries, and this is working with Geneva and the Government of Canada and Government of Australia to open new pathways for refugees to come to those countries based on skills, like based on economic streams. So we have access to 900 local refugees here in Canada, and then we have access to over 11,000 refugee skill profiles coming from overseas to give them the exemption. And then now, like, we're proud to say that the Government of Canada is the first government to actually be open to the idea and fund a pilot for that to bring refugee talent from Kenya as well. So this is how, this program basically will allow refugee to apply. So we'll exempt refugees from conditions that it's not, like within their hands. They cannot do it just because of the fact that they are not in their origin country. They are like in the hosting countries, and that will exempt those things, but I still look at their skills. And by the way, there's the first refugee actually already came to Australia based on this program ago, and now will come to Canada in, about like a few weeks from now. And the first hire was from a startup in Kitchener-Waterloo, who one of our co-founders is also a senior director in that startup.
That's brilliant. It's interesting to see this this refugee generation driving so much innovation. Now I have I think the last question we're going to take from our audience today is from Haneen, who addresses you, Mustafa, saying the refugee assistance model in Germany allows refugees to pursue any required validation of their profession, either in licensing or training, without the pressure to work in entry-level jobs to survive. This is not the case in Canada, he says, which puts the pressure on many funded projects assisting refugees to make internships or entry-level jobs the maximum available versus building on their capacity. How do you see the future of this model? That's a big question. Let's see if we can reduce it. Mustafa, I think he's interested in the development of a model that would open up the opportunity for internships.
Yes. So, and yes, that's true. I am aware of this in Germany, that they do a better work in terms of, also in France, by the way, it would be almost the same, where they do allow people from a certain profession to pursue their career in here, or, in that country. However, they still have to go through a sort of recertification in a way. The recertification is a lot easier than what it is here in Canada. To be honest, I don't have the answer yet for this. We will try. Definitely, it's on the mind that I have several organizations approach me to try to do this, especially to address the people with the health industry kind of background, because this is the toughest. And to be honest, for me, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we should make it definitely easier. The other interesting things in Germany that was produced, I think, about a year ago or a year and a half ago, was the 3+2. And the 3+2 is a new program in Germany where it allows, so if refugees were to be deported, for example, or they are waiting in line to get their papers processed, should they get a full-time offer from an employer, then they will get the access to, for about, I think, 3 years for work permit, and that kind of allows them to go through immigration stream. And then from this point, after they do this kind of full-time job for 3 years, then after that, with 2 years, they go through the immigration process, and then they become citizen at the end. This is something also very interesting from Germany. Right now, we're just kind of on the watch to see what's going to come out of it. There are like a few other organizations kind of partner, or let's say kind of colleagues in terms of organization, because I am part of international, or Jumpstart part of international network called Network for Refugee Voices, which is a group of refugee-led organizations trying to link refugees to policymaking in a way, and we will see that. And hopefully in Canada we can, in the future we can propose more innovative ideas.
And if I could just add to him just before we move on, just because it touches on the next webinar in our series, which is really looking at thinking out of the box and looking at different ideas to support refugee integration to the labor market. And to your question, Haneen, our next webinar really looks at innovative ideas, and so we'll be featuring a Canadian initiative called the Align Network, which is being led by Magnet and OTEC, which is really looking at how do you assess refugees' kind of core personality traits, so that we're not streamlining them into survival employment, but instead we're making sure that they're being matched with employment opportunities where they really can be successful and thrive and develop in that role and build their capacity. And so I encourage you to tune into next month's webinar that Kim and I will be co-hosting, that will really look at an example here in Canada as well as in Germany that's trying to meet the needs of refugees and supporting them find meaningful employment that matches their skills and competencies more effectively than survival jobs. Because I agree with Mustafa's point, we don't have the perfect response now, but I think with the changing future of work, that Canada will definitely have to reassess its model of integration.
Yeah, thank you. No, and again, to Devin's point, that's what these sessions, like this one today, are all about. They're about putting city to city, country to country, peer to peer, and I think we can learn from one another. So this is a critical part of what we're trying to do here in the Cities Migration Learning Exchange. I think we've had a pretty exciting session today, so I want to thank everyone. Our time has run out. I always like to ask our presenters one last question, a very, very short, one word or one phrase. If there was one thing that we could do to bring more employers on board around refugee employment, what would that be? And maybe, Elizabeth, I'll go to you.
Sure. I would say just sharing these success stories because to Mustafa's point, refugees do contribute, and we really need to hammer that home. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah. How about you, Mustafa? What's the one thing we can do to bring more employers on board?
I think to assure them, yes, with the success stories, also to assure them, try to facilitate the reach to refugees. And in order for that to happen, we see a lot of commitment. In order for that to happen, they need to work with refugees in a way as an employer, as an organization that's proposing this. I mean, every time we say, just imagine that you are in a program or a set that you want to advocate or do program for women, and then you have no women on that program or kind of set, or then if you want to do something with refugees, and then make sure that it's easy and smooth and happen right, you got to work with refugees and share more success stories.
Right. Shorten the reach, work with, not for refugees. Excellent. Devin, do you have one comment for us?
Yeah, I would just encourage employers that they don't have to do this by themselves. There are robust service, settlement, employment organizations in your communities, and to be reaching out to those established networks. They want to hear from you, they want to help you, they want to support you, and just, a brief plug to Hire Immigrants on those success stories. Myself and Kim Turner at Cities of Migration, we want to hear from you. If you have successes, if you have best practices, we want to be modeling them, because I agree and echo Elizabeth's point that we need to change the narrative. We need to share those successes so that other employers really feel like they're missing out if they don't learn to adapt to this new talent pool.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Our time has run out. Today's event is the first in a three-part webinar series brought to you by Hire Immigrants, the Bertelsmann Stiftung, and the Immigrant Futures Project at Cities of Migration. We're bringing to life a new report, Investing in Refugee Talent, Lessons Learned in Labor Market Integration. You can find it on the Hire Immigrants website at www.hireimmigrants.ca and at citiesofmigration.ca with the archived webinar and related resources from today's session. So on behalf of all of our participants, Cities of Migration and Hire Immigrants, let me thank our co-host Devin Franklin from Hire Immigrants and our distinguished presenters, Mustafa Alio with Jumpstart Refugee Talent and Elizabeth Bolton-Lim from the Business Development Bank of Canada. Thank you for a brilliant exchange of ideas. Today's event is the first in a series of Immigrant Future webinars, workshops, and events brought to you in partnership with Hire Immigrants Magnet, Hamilton Economic Development, and the Halifax Partnership, with funding support from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Thank you to Nico Kazenkad, can't forget him, for impeccable technical support at the Cities of Migration Learn Exchange, and I'd like to thank the production team here at Ryerson University. And to you, our audiences in Cities of Migration everywhere, I'd like you to imagine this excellent work being interpreted in your city, adapted by your organization, or changing your neighborhood. We'd really like to hear your stories. We want to share more good practices, so please stay connected.